that, exactly what leaders in Asia did not want anything that might incite the North Korean leader. Stephanie?
There's a lot to unpack here. Thank you, Chris. I want to bring in my great panel this morning. Jeremy Peters, a New York Times reporter and MSNBC contributor. David Rothkopf, a visiting scholar for the Carnegie Endowment and host of the Deep State radio podcast. Evan Siegfried, a Republican strategist. And Eddie Glaude, an MSNBC contributor and professor at Princeton. Jeremy, I got to start with you. President Trump and how he handled the meetings with Duterte. Not just Duterte, Putin and Xi Jinping. All of these guys are considered authoritarian leaders to some degree. Yet in each case, Trump seems to be willing to defer to them and not challenge. And I realize when you are there face to face, it's tough to duke it out. But come on, like, think about who these guys are. And the president over and over seems to be cozying up to them.
That's right, and it's entirely consistent with how he's behaved with other world leaders whose regimes have a history of egregious human rights abuses, from China to Saudi Arabia to Russia. And this is entirely consistent with Donald Trump's worldview, which is that the United States is not a global policeman. It's not going to get involved in other countries' business and how they treat their own citizens. That's very different from how previous Republican presidents have treated the role of the United States in the global community. Donald Trump and many of his advisors don't really believe that there is such a thing as a global community. So, yeah, I don't think we should be surprised at all that this is how he's treating this issue of human rights abuses.
I mean, that is fair. We shouldn't be surprised. I wonder, when the president hears strongmen, if he knows that's not a compliment. David, I want you to weigh in. Now, the White House says that human rights briefly came up in President Trump's meeting with Duterte, while the government of the Philippines says it wasn't mentioned at all. At the very least, why do you think there's confusion over the messaging? That shouldn't we know what was said in that conversation? I mean, this is a U.S. adversary. Human rights violations are a big deal.
Well, the reason there's confusion is that somebody's lying, and I think that it's us. In all likelihood, if human rights came up at all, it was because Trump said, yeah, okay, I'm cool with that. This has been, as was said a moment ago, his pattern. And when you look at this entire trip, it's actually been a great trip. It was great for Xi Jinping. It was great for Vladimir Putin. It was good for Kim Jong-un because the president went after him. It's been good for Duterte. It was good for the TPP countries that went on to do a deal without the United States of America. It was good for people who like to see the United States weak and embroiled in political infighting, even on a foreign trip. The only party that was not benefited by this trip was the United States of America. And I think that was consistent from the beginning of the trip to the end.
Ring-a-ding-ding. You just wrap that up with a bow. David, I want you to stay on that, because even if the president doesn't want to talk about human rights violations, trade is what he was supposed to be there discussing. We know that in China, Rex Tillerson said, well, not much has really happened here. And the president thought it was such a great idea to get out of TPP. It's great for China. So in terms of trade for this country, while the president continues to talk about America first, how did he accomplish anything? Did he accomplish anything on this trip? Because the way I see it, it'd be a big fat no.
No, worse. It went backwards. TPP is going along without us. TPP was a great opportunity for the United States, an opportunity to get greater access to these countries. And now all these countries will be dealing with each other with advantages the U.S. won't have. At the same time, China, which has its own trade deal with all these other countries, is strengthened vis-a-vis them and is going to be going forward stronger. The only country in the entire Asia-Pacific region that has not benefited in trade terms from this trip is the United States of America.
President Trump, America first could turn out to be America left out in the cold. Evan, I need you to weigh in on this, because I saw you weigh in on it on Twitter. North Korea. It's not a surprise. We've seen our fair share of insults between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. We know Kim Jong-un called the president a dotard, which for me was a new word, but boy, was it one. But over the weekend, North Korean government called President Trump a lunatic old man, and President Trump essentially responded by calling Kim Jong-un short and fat. One more time, President Trump called Kim Jong-un short and fat. I read that and I thought, wow, it's not like me calling somebody freckle face. You went out on Twitter and said you're speechless.
This is diplomacy being conducted via Twitter in a sandbox, essentially, between two men-childs. And what we're seeing here...
Don't insult children. My kids don't talk like that.
Yeah, neither do my nephews. But what we're seeing here, the president actually has had a very good North Korea policy. But when it comes to whenever he speaks publicly about it, his bluster actually shoots the United States in the foot. Where the North Koreans have told their people that the Americans are this bloodthirsty, raging, warmongering people. And then when President Trump comes out and says fire and fury and locked and loaded, it only reinforces the stereotype of America as evil. And now the President of the United States is playing to a man who has an ego problem, who will kill people in his own regime if they somehow insult him. And he's saying he's short and fat. This is not a place we want to be in as a country whatsoever, nor as a world. There is no teacher to say, okay, Donald, go in the corner. You have a timeout for 5 minutes.
Okay, Eddie, you've got the U.S. carrying out military drills in that region. We've got 3 aircraft carriers there. We have not had that kind of show of force in the region in over a decade. What in the world is going on there with the president with the short and fat while he's there? If I'm a military mom, I'm nervous.
Well, not only a military mom, but just Americans generally. I mean, what we have here is a petulant adolescent who has control over the largest and most powerful military in the world. And what we've seen over the course of this Asia trip, right, we've seen that what's most important to Donald Trump is the kind of performance of relationships, that those relationships ought to constitute substance. But we don't know what the substance of those relationships will mean in terms of trade. What is the one-on-one relationship with Abe? What will be affect with the one-on-one relationship with the Premier of China? What will be the consequence of the one-on-one relationship with Putin? He just says, by definition, these are good things. And then on top of that, what we see is, in effect, make America great again is, in effect, let me be great. America being great or first is, in effect, Trump being first or great. And so he doesn't really distinguish our values from him. And so when it comes to the moment, the time, when Duterte is actually chastising the press folks in the press conference, he's laughing because he really he's not committed to the values, the ideals that animate this place.
The press spies.
And to piggyback on what Eddie's saying, remember in the campaign, Donald Trump talked about that famous photo in Tiananmen Square of the man facing down the tank?
Yes.
He called that strong. And when Donald Trump goes out and says that Duterte is a good guy, and he admires these strongmen, Erdogan, Duterte, and others, and Putin, because they control their figures, and Xi Jinping.
He does admire them.
The whole point of America
brand.
is that we are a symbol of hope and freedom throughout the world. And our strength comes from standing up to that and standing up for human rights. And the President of the United States went and he said, I'm just going to wash my hands of it. He talked all on the campaign trail about how America is weak. No, we were strong because we stood up, be they Republican or Democrats. And the President of the United States is refusing to stand up for human rights and basic values. And he's made us weak. He thinks we're strong, but we're not, because he's a coward.
All right, well, President Trump is one person. We are strong. We are the United States of America. David, former CIA Director John Brennan over the weekend said that the president is being played. Here's what he said on CNN.
I think Mr. Putin is very clever in terms of playing to Mr. Trump's interest in being flattered. And also, I think Mr. Trump is, for whatever reason, either intimidated by Mr. Putin, afraid of what he could do or what might come out as a result of these investigations.
Listen, and we know this trip, these other world leaders learned from President Trump's sword dance and the joy he felt when he was in Saudi Arabia. On several stops, he got lavish receptions, unusually lavish in China. Is that a sign that other countries are flattering their way into Trump's good graces?
Well, it certainly seems to be a sign that they're doing that. I mean, I think, you put your finger on it. It was the orb, Everybody saw the orb in Saudi Arabia, and they said, oh, we know the way to his heart. Just give him a show. And you see what happened in China. He went. He saw the Forbidden City. Xi Jinping threw him a big banquet, and Xi Jinping gave him nothing. He got nothing in his negotiations. And the Russians flatter him, and Putin is very nice to him. And Trump comes out and actually does Putin's bidding. And he says, look, not only do I believe Putin over the intelligence community, but I'm going to personally attack the people who've been leading that intelligence community while overseas, on Veterans Day. I'm going to humiliate all of them. What more could Vladimir Putin want? Donald Trump is the cheapest date on the international stage right now. You smile, you give him a little bit of a good time, and he'll do anything you want.
You know what? I cannot handle that response. It's so stunning. Jeremy, before we go, what is Washington's reaction to this? When the president, we keep saying he gives Vladimir Putin a pass. He's not giving Vladimir Putin a pass. To David's point, he's doing his bidding. He's hooking a brother up right, left, and center, you know, against his own people, against his own country, against his own intelligence agencies. What does Washington say about this?
I think there's actually two things going on there, Stephanie. And one is a little bit of a misunderstanding of what Trump actually said. He said he believes that Putin believes he didn't meddle in the election. That's different from Donald Trump saying, I believe Putin didn't meddle in the election. So I think we need to be very clear about that distinction. Now, certainly that is showing some deference to Vladimir Putin, and that will alarm a lot of people, and certainly has in Washington. The other issue, though, is this political persecution that Donald Trump feels. He is always the victim of some type of larger political ploy by his enemies, and he sees James Clapper as part of that. And so when he goes out and says, you know, these guys are hacks, it's less, I think, in Donald Trump's mind at least, an attack on his intelligence community than it is on the former Obama-aligned intelligence officials whom he believes have always been out to get him in the first place. And again, as I said, persecution is always at the front of Donald Trump's mind.
All right, well, we might not have heard them, but you heard from James Clapper. I've got a feeling Mattis, McMaster, Kelly, they probably didn't like that the president said that either, though over the weekend, Chief of Staff John Kelly said he doesn't follow President Trump's tweets. And I'm going to make two statements about that. I certainly hope he's not telling the truth, because as the chief of staff to the president of the United States, seeing that the president has said he loves Twitter, it is his main form of communication with the millions of people who follow him, I certainly hope that General Kelly will follow President Trump's tweets, whether he likes them or not.